Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to speak directly to every woman who has ever felt the weight of compromise pressing down on her shoulders. Every woman who's ever questioned her worth, silenced her voice, or stayed in a situation that didn't honor her. It's time to stop settling. Not next year, not tomorrow, today. Imagine for a moment that you're walking through a marketplace. There are all kinds of goods on display, some cheap and poorly made, others crafted with care and worth a high price. Now picture a merchant approaching you and saying, "I'll give you 2 coins for that diamond in your hand. You know its value, you know what it's worth, and yet if you don't speak up, if you hesitate, uncertain, you might just hand it over. Not because the diamond lost its value, but because you forgot it." That's what happens every time a woman doesn't know her worth. That's what happens when you start believing you're only as valuable as someone else's approval, attention, or validation. And this is where the settling begins, not just in relationships, but in how you see yourself, what you tolerate, what you accept as normal, and what you stop believing is possible. You must know your worth. Not in a vague, motivational quote kind of way, but in a deep, unshakable, God-given conviction. Because if you don't, someone else will decide it for you. And people who don't see your value will always treat you like you're replaceable. Let me tell you this, you are not here to be someone's option. You are not someone's backup plan, their convenience, or their temporary fix while they figure out their life. You are not meant to be defined by someone's inability to appreciate who you are. But the truth is, many women never learned how to see their worth. Maybe you were taught that being strong made you intimidating. Maybe you were told to lower your standards because no one is perfect. Or maybe life just wore you down. Bad relationships, betrayal, broken promises, until you started believing that this is just how life is. So you settle, you tolerate things that hurt, you justify behavior that disrespects you. You convince yourself that it's not that bad, that it could be worse, that maybe this is the best it'll get. That is a lie. Settling is not humility. It is not patience. It is not grace. Settling is what happens when you forget who you are. And I want to tell you today, remember who you are. Remember the beauty, the strength, the wisdom, the kindness that was put into you, not by culture, not by trends, not by the approval of others. And if you know your worth, you must protect it. That means setting boundaries. That means saying no even when it's hard. That means not replying to that message at 2 a.m. just because you feel lonely. It means not pretending you're okay with being someone's occasional interest when you're made for committed love. If someone can't rise to meet your standards, your response should not be to lower them. Your response should be to walk away with dignity intact and head held high. Some of you have been waiting for permission to stop tolerating things that drain you. Let this be your permission. Some of you have been hoping someone will finally see what you bring to the table. But maybe, just maybe, it's time to stop begging for a seat at the wrong table and build your own. Your worth is not rooted in your relationship status. It's not based on how many followers you have, how much attention you get, or whether someone finally texts you back. That's the world system, and it's built to keep you hungry, insecure, and chasing after crumbs. God's system is different. He says you're already chosen, already loved, already set apart, that your value is not up for debate or negotiation. When you believe that, really believe it, you start walking differently, you speak differently, you choose differently, because you're no longer trying to be enough. You know you are enough. And let me tell you this, when you start walking in your worth, you will lose relationships, connections, even opportunities that once seemed so important. But don't panic, don't go running back. Those losses are not punishments. They are pruning. They are clearing the space for what was meant for you. Knowing your worth also means you won't have to manipulate or convince someone to treat you right. Love that has to be chased isn't love at all. Respect that has to be begged for will never last. If someone doesn't value you now, no amount of patience or effort will teach them. You're not asking for too much when you ask for honesty, consistency, kindness, loyalty, and respect. You're asking the right things of the wrong people if they call you too demanding. Don't let a scarcity mindset trick you into thinking you have to settle for whoever shows up. You don't. You're allowed to wait. You're allowed to walk away. You're allowed to say, "This isn't what I'm looking for," without guilt. You are not weak for having standards. You are not arrogant for protecting your peace. You are not unlovable because others couldn't see the depth in you. Don't ever let someone else's inability to see your value cause you to doubt it. Don't ever exchange your crown for temporary affection. Don't ever build a life on the approval of people who wouldn't care if it crumbled. You are more than what you've been through. You are more than what others did to you. You are more than who left or who stayed. And the moment you realize that, you stop settling for less in every area of life. So here's what I want you to take with you. Know your worth, guard it, honor it, and never again apologize for being a woman who refuses to settle for anything less than what aligns with her purpose, peace, and identity. Let me tell you something that might hurt a little, but it's necessary. Many women aren't in love, they're just afraid of being alone. That's not condemnation, that's truth. And the sooner we face that truth, the sooner we can be free from the kind of attachments that only bring confusion, heartache, and compromise. There is a world of difference between real love and the desperation to not feel lonely. And if you don't learn to discern that difference, you'll spend your life giving yourself to people who were never meant to carry your heart. Loneliness is real. It's not some weakness that only the emotionally immature experience. We were created for connection, for intimacy, for companionship, but loneliness becomes dangerous when it drives us into situations that dishonor us, that keep us bound, or that distort our view of what love truly is. A lot of women are settling, not because they don't know something is wrong, but because they think being with someone, anyone, is better than being alone. And that's a lie from the pit of hell. That lie has trapped countless women in abusive relationships, toxic marriages, meaningless flings, and spiritual confusion. If your fear of loneliness is louder than your commitment to self-worth, you'll always choose what feels familiar over what's actually good for you. You'll keep going back to the same kind of man, the same cycle of disappointment, the same pattern of being half-loved, because it's easier than sitting with yourself and learning how to be whole without someone else validating you. But listen carefully. Real love never preys on your insecurity. Real love doesn't require you to abandon yourself just to be chosen. Real love builds. It doesn't bruise. It anchors. It doesn't confuse. One of the greatest acts of faith is believing that being alone does not mean being unloved. Some of the most spiritually powerful seasons in a woman's life come when she is alone, just her and God. That's where the healing happens. That's where identity is restored. That's where purpose gets clearer. But too often we rush out of those seasons because silence feels scary, because we've mistaken the lack of attention for a lack of worth. And so we pick up what's broken and try to make it whole with our effort, our patience, our sacrifice, hoping that if we just give more, love harder, wait longer, it'll finally work. But deep down, you know it's not love. You know it's fear. Let me ask you, when was the last time you asked yourself why you keep choosing the people you do, why you stay when you know you should leave, why you settle for being almost respected, almost seen, almost loved? If you were honest, would it be love that's keeping you there, or is it the fear of being alone? Because when you start confusing the two, you'll start accepting things that you'd never let someone you love accept. You'll start giving chances to people who don't deserve access to your lives. And that kind of settling doesn't just cost you your peace, it costs you your identity. God never intended for your life to revolve around being picked. You're not some audition for someone's affection. You're not a backup plan for when they're done playing games. You were created with intention. You were created with value. And if someone's presence in your life causes you to question that, then it's time to walk away, no matter how long you've known them, no matter how afraid you are to be without them. Let me say this with clarity. Loneliness is not your enemy. In fact, it can become your greatest teacher. It reveals what you truly believe about yourself. It shows you where your identity is rooted. It exposes whether you've been depending on relationships to feel whole, or if you've truly allowed God to define your worth. Don't waste your lonely seasons. Don't rush through them. Lean into them. Learn to sit with your own soul. Learn to enjoy your own company. Learn to hear God's voice without it being drowned out by someone else's opinions. Some of the most tragic decisions in life happen when we don't allow God to fill the void of loneliness. We try to fill it ourselves with people, with distractions, with shallow connections that look like love but lack depth, loyalty, and spiritual alignment. And later, when we realize it was never real, we're left more broken than before. That's not God's plan for you. God's plan is not for you to beg for affection, to compete for attention, or to chase someone who doesn't even know how to love. Real love doesn't play games with your heart. Real love doesn't keep you guessing. It brings clarity, not confusion, peace, not pressure. There is a quiet kind of strength that comes from being single and content. It's not flashy, it's not always praised, but it's real, and that kind of strength builds the foundation for relationships that are actually healthy, whole, and God-honoring. You don't need to compromise who you are to be loved. You don't need to settle for attention when you were created for covenant. And let me speak to the one who feels like she's waited too long, who feels like maybe she missed her chance, or that time is slipping away. Hear me, God is not in a rush. He is not late, and your worth doesn't expire with time. Don't let impatience lead you into the arms of someone who only sees a fraction of who you are. If it's not rooted in truth, if it doesn't call you higher, if it doesn't make you more like Christ, it's not love and it's not worth it. So if you're single, be single with boldness. Be single with purpose. Don't waste it wishing it away. Grow, heal, build, dream. And if you're in something right now that feels like love, but requires you to constantly prove, chase, or shrink, take a step back and ask yourself, is this love, or is this fear dressed up in the costume of affection? Love never demands you settle. It calls you higher. It protects your identity. It brings you closer to God, not further from yourself. And until that kind of love shows up, you are allowed to wait. You are allowed to walk away from everything that looks like love, but feels like change. Some of you are living small, not because God made you small, but because you've convinced yourself it's safer that way. You've outgrown the room, but you're still trying to fit into the corner, still trying to keep the peace, still trying not to take up too much space because somewhere along the line, someone told you that shrinking was necessary for love, for acceptance, for survival. But let me ask you this, how long will you keep molding yourself into something you were never meant to be just so others won't feel uncomfortable around your calling? There comes a point in every woman's life where she must decide, do I keep shrinking to be tolerated, or do I finally stand up and be who I was created to be, even if it costs me approval, even if it disrupts the room, even if it makes others walk away. I've seen far too many women trade their voice for silence, their strength for compliance, their light for shadows, all for the illusion of peace. But it's not real peace if it costs you your identity. It's not real love if it demands that you make yourself less just to keep it. That's not honor. That's manipulation wrapped in false humility. You were never meant to be half alive. You weren't created to just go along to get along. You weren't designed to be a background character in your own life. And yet that's what happens when you keep shrinking. You stop dreaming because dreaming feels dangerous. You stop asking for more because you've been told to be content with less. You stop showing up fully because somewhere in the past someone made you feel like too much was the problem. So now you wear quietness like a costume, not because you're at peace, but because you're exhausted from apologizing for who you are. But let me tell you the truth. You are not too much. You are not too intense, too driven, too emotional, too loud, too anything. You are exactly who you were created to be. And the people who truly love you will never ask you to shrink to make them feel more secure. What you need to understand is this: shrinking doesn't protect you. It only prolongs the pain, because you'll eventually start to resent the very people you tried to please. You'll look around at a life that seems calm on the outside but is chaotic on the inside, because you know deep down you traded authenticity for acceptance. That kind of life doesn't bring joy. It brings quiet bitterness. It brings silent suffering. It brings the heavy realization that you've spent years making yourself small for people who never had the capacity to hold your full self anyway. And what happens when you stay in places you've outgrown? You get restless. You start questioning everything. You wonder why your peace feels shallow, why your relationships feel forced, why your spirit feels trapped. It's not because you're broken. It's because your soul is trying to expand into the space it was made for, and the people around you are trying to keep you where they're comfortable. But comfort is not always your friend. Sometimes comfort is the very thing that keeps you from becoming who God designed you to be. Sometimes comfort is the enemy of calling, and sometimes walking in obedience means walking away from what once fit but no longer aligns with who you're becoming. Let me put it plainly. If the environment you're in punishes growth, it's not a healthy environment. If your circle gets smaller every time you become more honest, more healed, more confident, then it was never a circle, it was a cage. And cages don't care about your destiny. They care about your obedience to their boundaries. They care that you stay in line, not that you walk in truth. But you weren't made for cages. You were made to soar. And I know it's hard. I know it's lonely to leave the familiar. I know it's scary to step into a season where you can no longer hide behind who you used to be. But let me tell you, what's on the other side of your boldness is worth every moment of discomfort. What's on the other side of your no to shrinking is a life that looks like peace, sounds like purpose, and feels like freedom. So stop apologizing for your gifts. Stop apologizing for your voice. Stop apologizing for being ambitious, for wanting more, for not being content to just survive when you were meant to thrive. Stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You don't owe anyone a watered-down version of who you are just to make them stay. The right people, the ones aligned with your future, will not only make room for your fullness, they will celebrate it. They will challenge you to grow, not guilt you into shrinking. They will speak to the highest version of you, not the most convenient one. Let's be real. The world doesn't benefit when women play small. Your family doesn't grow when you suppress your voice. Your relationships don't thrive when you pretend to be less than what you are. And your soul, it withers, slowly, quietly, until one day you look in the mirror and barely recognize the woman staring back. Don't let it get to that point. If you have to shrink to be loved, it's not love. If you have to dim your light to be seen, you're standing in the wrong room. If you have to silence your truth to be heard, you're speaking to the wrong audience. It's time to rise. It's time to take up space. It's time to walk fully in who you are, not arrogantly but unapologetically, not with bitterness but with boldness, because this world needs you awake. It needs you whole. It needs you to stop hiding behind politeness and perfectionism and step into power and purpose. You will not be everyone's cup of tea. That's fine. You weren't called to be easily digestible. You were called to be transformative, and transformation always disrupts comfort. So if you've been shrinking just to keep the peace, just to be accepted, just to avoid conflict, it's time to stop, because you weren't made to fit. You were made to shift the atmosphere. You were made to stand. And when you finally do the right things, the right people, the right opportunities, they will find you, but only after you stop pretending that smallness is. ChatGPT said, "One of the greatest tragedies I see over and over again is this: women who know better but still settle because they don't trust themselves. They feel the red flags, they hear the warning signs, they sense the shift in their but instead of acting on what they know deep down, they second guess, they hesitate, they doubt their own discernment, and before they know it, they're in relationships, situations, even entire lifestyles that they knew in the beginning weren't aligned with who they are or what they value." You can't afford to ignore your discernment. You can't afford to silence your intuition. When something feels off, when your spirit is unsettled, it's not just emotion, it's a signal. It's a tap on the shoulder from God that says, this isn't for. But too often, we try to explain away what we feel. We overthink, we rationalize, we make excuses for other people's behavior, all while silencing our own inner voice. And let me tell you, the cost of not listening to that voice is always higher than you expect. We live in a world that teaches women to doubt themselves, to question whether they're being too sensitive or too emotional. You've heard it, you're overreacting, you're imagining things, you're just insecure. And after hearing that long enough, you begin to second guess your own senses. You start letting other people define what's real, what's acceptable, what's tolerable, and slowly you drift away from the voice of wisdom inside you. Let me be clear, trusting yourself is not arrogant, it's not pride, it's not rebellion. Trusting yourself is honoring the fact that you were created with discernment, with a spirit that knows when something is not right. And when you ignore that discernment, when you keep letting it get overridden by charm, by chemistry, by potential, you're not walking in wisdom, you're walking in emotional danger. I've seen women give years to relationships they should have left after the second. not because they didn't notice the red flags, but because they told themselves, maybe it's not that bad, maybe I'm just afraid, maybe he'll change. No, you weren't being afraid, you weren't being dramatic, you were discerning, you were catching on to something that didn't line up with truth, and instead of honoring that instinct, you talked yourself into ignoring it. That's how settling begins, not because you didn't know better, but because you stopped trusting that what you knew. When God is trying to protect you, He will stir something in your spirit. It won't always be loud, it won't always make sense to your emotions, but it will be consistent. That quiet sense of, this isn't right. That tension that rises in your chest when someone says the right words, but their actions tell a different story. That pause before you say yes to something that looks good on the outside but feels hollow on the inside. That's not weakness. That's not fear. That's discernment. And you better learn to trust it like your life depends on it, because sometimes it does. But here's the hard truth. Sometimes we don't want to trust ourselves because we don't want to face what that trust would cost us. If you really listened to what your heart and spirit were saying, you'd have to walk away from some people. You'd have to close some doors. You'd have to leave comfort and step into the unknown. And that's terrifying. So instead, we choose denial. We choose distraction. We choose to stay and hope for the best, even when everything inside us is saying, go. Don't get so attached to potential that you lose sight of reality. Don't get so impressed by charisma that you ignore care. Don't let your desire for companionship drown out the still small voice that's trying to lead you into peace, because at the end of the day, you are the one who has to live with the consequences of the choices you make. No one else is going to carry that burden for you. Not the friends who cheered on the relationship, not the family who said just give it time, not the world who told you you're lucky to have someone. No, it's you're the one who has to live with the loss of peace, the erosion of self-worth, the ache of staying somewhere you were never meant to be. Trusting yourself doesn't mean you'll never get it wrong. It doesn't mean you'll have all the answers. But it does mean you're willing to listen to that deeper voice that says, even if I don't have all the evidence yet, I know this doesn't sit right with my spirit. And you act on that, not with pride, but with clarity. That clarity will save your life. I don't just mean I mean spiritually, emotionally, relationally. It will protect your energy. It will protect your heart. It will protect your future. But you've got to stop outsourcing your wisdom to people who don't live your life. You've got to stop handing your discernment over to others like they know your spirit better than you do. God didn't put discernment in you so you could keep ignoring it. He didn't give you wisdom just so you could bury it under guilt and fear and pressure to conform. He gave it to you so you could walk in freedom, so you could move with courage, so you could say no to what is beneath you and yes to what aligns with your worth. And let me say this especially to the woman who feels like she's failed. Maybe you ignored the red flags before. Maybe you stayed when you knew you should have left. Maybe you kept believing someone's words, even though their actions kept wounding you. It's okay, forgive yourself, but learn from it. Don't let that pain be wasted. Don't let it turn into bitterness. Let it turn into wisdom. Let it sharpen your vision. Let it teach you to never again doubt what your spirit is telling you. You've got to become the kind of woman who doesn't need a full explanation to walk away from what doesn't align, who doesn't wait for things to get worse before she makes a decision, who doesn't need a crowd of people to agree before she obeys the whisper in her own soul, because your peace is too expensive to trade for temporary companionship. Your purpose is too sacred to give away to people who can't respect, and your life is too short to spend it stuck in situations that drain you because you were too afraid to trust your own discernment. So many women end up settling not because they lack strength, not because they don't have clarity, but because they've never taken the time to define what they actually want and deserve. And if you don't define that for yourself, life will define it for you. Other people will define it for you. And the tragedy is, they'll define it far too small. It's not enough to say, I just want someone who loves me. That's the bare minimum. That's the floor, not the ceiling. You were made for more than being tolerated. You were made for more than surviving. You were made for more than showing up to a life that checks the boxes, but leaves your soul empty. If you don't take time to define your standards with intention, then you'll keep lowering them every time someone offers you a little attention, a little validation, a little comfort. But here's the truth. truth. You don't rise to the level of your potential. You fall to the level of your standards. So you better set them high, and you better know why. I'm not just talking about relationships. I'm talking about your life, your calling, your values, your future. What kind of woman do you want to become? What kind of peace do you want to protect? What kind of legacy do you want to leave? Because if you don't define that with clarity and conviction, then someone else's agenda will write your story. Too many women wake up 10 years into a relationship or career or lifestyle they never wanted, wondering how they got there. And the answer is usually this: they didn't decide on their standards, so they got swept up by circumstance. They let chemistry override compatibility. They let pressure override purpose. They let loneliness override wisdom. And they made peace with a life that never actually made peace with them. You've got to decide. You've got to make it plain. What does love mean to you? What does respect look like? What does partnership feel like? What kind of environment do you need to thrive? What are your non-negotiables? What are your deal breakers? Not based on fantasy, but based on faith, truth, and wisdom. Because when you define your standards with intentionality, you start filtering people, opportunities, and decisions through a much clearer lens. You stop wasting time. You stop explaining your worth. You stop entertaining confusion and start creating clarity. Now I know what the world will say. It'll tell you, you're being too picky. You need to be more flexible. Lower your expectations. And maybe you've even heard that from people close to you, people who mean well but don't understand the cost of compromising what matters most. But let me tell you something. Standards are not about being picky. Standards are about being prepared. Standards are not about control. They're about vision. You are not being too much when you ask for alignment, honesty, spiritual leadership, emotional maturity, or consistency. That's not a fantasy. That's called stewardship of your future. And if someone can't rise to meet your standards, that's not a sign to lower them. That's a sign they're not your assignment. Stop confusing someone's disappointment with your direction. You don't owe anyone access to your life just because they're interested in you. Interest is cheap. Consistency is costly. Anyone can say the right things in a moment, but your standards are what help you discern who has the maturity to live those things out over time. And let's talk about something uncomfortable for a moment. Some of you are afraid to set high standards because deep down you don't believe you're worthy of them. You think, well, maybe this is the best I can get, or I don't want to come across as demanding, or if I'm too honest about what I want, I might scare them off. Listen, if honesty scares someone off, they were never secure enough to walk with you in the first place. If your clarity makes them uncomfortable, they were only comfortable with you when you were confused. And if your standards make them walk away, that's not a loss. That's a divine filter doing its job. You don't have to beg someone to treat you like you matter. You don't have to convince someone to choose you. You don't have to earn love. Real love honors your stand. It doesn't ask you to compromise them. And when you know what you stand for, you stop settling for what you're supposed to walk away from. Let me say this as plainly as I can. You teach people how to treat you, not with your words, but with your boundaries, with what you allow, with what you tolerate, with what you entertain, even when your spirit is saying no. If you keep staying silent when something crosses the line, don't be surprised when disrespect becomes the norm. If you keep making excuses for bad behavior, don't be surprised when that becomes your new standard. You can't complain about what you allow, and you can't expect change from people who benefit from your silence. You are not being harsh by having standards. You are not being cold by requiring consistency. You are not being prideful by saying no to confusion. You are being whole, and you are finally learning how to love yourself enough not to let desperation override discernment. And no, it's not always going to be easy. There will be moments when compromise looks tempting, when loneliness whispers lies, when the wait feels too long. But trust me when I say this, it is better to be alone in truth than surrounded by people in pretense. It is better to wait in alignment than to settle in confusion. It is better to walk the narrow path of conviction than to be carried by the current of culture. So take the time to get clear. Write it down, pray over it, refine it, revisit it. Make your standards so clear that they act as a mirror, reflecting who belongs in your life and who doesn't. Make them a filter that preserves your peace, your purpose, and your future. Because when you know what you stand for, you stop falling for anything that comes dressed in potential. You stop settling for surface-level connections. You stop entertaining people who drain you because now you know your time is valuable, your energy is sacred, your purpose is too precious to waste on confusion.